20 kilograms of solid gold, not crafted into a necklace, not shaped into ceremonial regalia, not worn as ornament. 20 kilograms of gold forged into restraints and suspended from the body of a captured queen. When Roman sources describe Zenobia of Palmyra walking in Aurelian's triumph, they emphasize the spectacle, the glitter, the submission, the symbolism of a defeated Eastern monarch displayed before the Roman people. But what is often left unsaid is the calculated physical brutality embedded within that symbolism. Gold is dense. 20 kilograms is not decorative. It is structural weight. It presses into bone. It strains the vertebrae. It alters posture. It forces the body downward. The Roman triumph was not merely a parade. It was a ritualized demonstration of cosmic order. Rome asserting that rebellion had been corrected. That imbalance had been resolved, and Zenobia was not being marched simply as a prisoner. She was being transformed into a narrative device. To understand how a sovereign ruler ended her political life in chains, one must begin not in Rome, but in crises. In the mid-3rd century, the Roman Empire was experiencing what modern historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Plague-ravaged cities, frontier defenses collapsed under repeated barbarian incursions. Emperors rose and fell at astonishing speed, many assassinated by their own troops. Economic instability fractured provincial loyalty. From the vantage point of Palmyra, a wealthy caravan city linking Rome to Persia in the east, the empire appeared exhausted. Zenobia did not rise in a vacuum. After the assassination of her husband Odenathus, she assumed regency for her young son Valerian. What followed was not reckless rebellion, but strategic expansion. She secured Syria. She annexed Egypt, Rome's critical grain supplier. She extended authority into parts of Asia Minor. Importantly, she did not initially reject Roman legitimacy outright. Coins bore her son's name alongside that of the Roman emperor. Titles were layered carefully. Authority was asserted incrementally. Her mistake was not immediate rebellion. Her mistake was misjudging Rome's capacity for recovery. When Lucius Domitius Aurelianus became emperor in 270 AD, he inherited fragmentation. Unlike many of his predecessors, Aurelian was not primarily a political figure. He was a career soldier hardened by frontier warfare. His objective was simple: reunify the empire. He defeated the breakaway Gallic Empire in the west. Then he turned east. Zenobia's forces met Roman legions at Iamae, and later at Amasa. Both engagements ended in Roman victory. Palmyra itself was besieged. As supplies diminished, Zenobia attempted escape, likely intending to seek Persian support beyond the Euphrates. Roman cavalry intercepted her before she could cross. No epic duel followed. No ceremonial surrender. A queen was physically restrained by soldiers, executing orders. In Roman political logic, what happened next mattered more than the capture itself. Captured rebel leaders were often killed immediately. It eliminated risk and signaled dominance. Yet Aurelian chose otherwise. The decision was strategic. Execution creates martyrdom. Martyrdom creates narrative instability. A living captive, however, becomes spectacle. The Roman triumph required visual proof of restored hierarchy. Senators needed reassurance. The plebeian masses needed entertainment and affirmation. Provincial governors needed warning. Aurelian understood political theater. Zenobia would live not as sovereign, but as evidence. Sources describe a proceeding in which Zenobia blamed her advisors for the rebellion. Among those executed was Cassius Longinus, a philosopher of significant intellectual reputation. Whether her testimony was coerced or pragmatic survival remains debated among historians. Roman accounts present her as claiming she was misled by ambitious men. Such narratives conveniently reinforced Roman gender ideology. Powerful women were portrayed as manipulated or unstable rather than autonomous strategists. What is clear is this: her inner circle was executed. She was preserved. Her legal status shifted from ruler to property of the Roman state. In Roman administrative terms, she became part of the spoils of war. The Roman triumph was ritualized domination. Victorious generals processed through Rome, displaying captives, treasures, and symbolic representations of conquered lands. At the culmination, certain prisoners were executed. Zenobia's presence altered the tone. Unlike barbarian chieftains, she was educated, multilingual, and politically sophisticated. Roman authors describe her walking with dignity despite the weight of chains. Reports of golden fetters appear in later accounts and may be embellished, yet the symbolic intent remains consistent. Wealth transformed into burden. In Rome, perception shaped legitimacy. Aurelian required the image of a humbled queen to counteract years of imperial instability. Zenobia's fate exists within a broader Roman tradition of dealing with Hastate's female captives. Boudica, in 60 AD Britannia, was flogged and her daughters assaulted, following Roman annexation of her territory. The violence was not spontaneous. It was performative domination designed to dismantle dynastic legitimacy. Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's sister, was paraded in Julius Caesar's triumph. The crowd's unexpected sympathy reportedly led Caesar to spare her life temporarily. Years later, she was assassinated in exile. Cleopatra VII, fully aware of Rome's patterns, refused capture after Octavian's victory at Actium. Her suicide was a political calculation, denying Rome the spectacle it desired. In EHK's Rome's handling of female sovereignty reveals an underlying principle. Humiliation was often more valuable than execution. Why did Roman audiences demand visible suffering? Triumphs functioned as civic catharsis. Citizens who endured economic strain and political chaos witnessed order restored. The humiliation of a foreign ruler affirmed Roman superiority. For the captive, however, the triumph represented identity dissolution. Names, titles, and lineage were replaced with a singular designation, conquered. Zenobia reportedly survived the parade and was granted residence near Tiber. Some accounts suggest she lived comfortably thereafter. Survival, however, does not equate to restoration. Her political identity ended in that procession. In 260 AD, Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persian ruler Shapura Roman. And later, Christian sources claim he was humiliated and possibly used as a mounting platform before dying in captivity. While details are debated, the symbolic inversion is striking. Rome, architect of triumphal humiliation, experienced its own emperor in chains. Imperial dominance proved reversible. The Roman Empire eventually fragmented beyond repair. Successive invasions and internal fractures eroded its dominance. Triumphs ceased. Monuments weathered. Yet the narratives of captured queens endured not solely as tales of Roman victory, but as case studies in political theater and gendered power. Zenobia's story illustrates a broader truth. Empires rarely seek only to defeat enemies. They seek to control the meaning of defeat. Execution ends resistance quickly. Humiliation rewrites memory. Rome, 274 AD. The city has prepared for weeks. Triumphs are not spontaneous celebrations. They are engineered spectacles. Streets are cleared. Platforms are constructed. Senators rehearse their positions. Foreign ambassadors are instructed where to stand so that they may observe and report home. Aurelian understands that this procession must accomplish more than celebration. It must repair confidence in a fractured empire. The route begins outside the city and winds through the Via Sacra toward the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Citizens crowd the roads before sunrise. Vendors sell bread and watered wine. Children are lifted onto shoulders. Veterans take front positions, eager to measure this victory against past glories. Then the procession begins. First come wagons filled with treasure from the East silks, spices, gold plate, statues taken from Palmyrene temples. Painted boards display the names of conquered cities. Antioch, Emesa Palmyra. Next march, captured soldiers. Then comes the spectacle the crowd has been waiting for. Zenobia. She does not stumble. Roman sources emphasize this detail, perhaps reluctantly, despite the weight of her restraints, whether truly 20 kilograms are symbolically described. She walks upright. Her garments are royal but subdued. Her face composed. The crowd roars, but their reaction is complex. Roman triumph audiences were not uniform mobs. They were politically aware citizens. Many had witnessed decades of instability. They understood what it meant that Rome had nearly lost the East. Zenobia represents both danger and restoration. Her presence says, "The empire fractured, and now it is whole again." She passes beneath arches, draped with laurel. Children point. Senators watch carefully. For them, this is not entertainment. It is proof that Aurelian deserves continued loyalty. Aurelian follows in a chariot, crowned with laurel, dressed as Jupiter. A slave stands behind him whispering the traditional reminder. Remember, you are mortal. But on this day, mortality feels distant. Modern viewers often misinterpret Roman triumphs as simple victory parades. In reality, they functioned as political recalibration. The empire in the 3rd century had splintered into 3 major entities: the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and the Central Roman core. Aurelian's campaigns reassembled these fragments. The triumph is not about punishing Zenobia. It is about restoring Roman cosmology. In Roman ideology, rebellion is not merely political dissent. It is disorder in the universe. The triumph dramatizes the correction of that disorder. Zenobia's humiliation is therefore not personal vengeance. It is ritual symbolism. She becomes a living representation of chaos subdued. Many defeated rulers were executed at the end of the triumph. Zenobia was not. Sources suggest she was granted residence in Tiber, modern Tivoli, east of Rome. Some accounts claim she lived in relative comfort, possibly marrying a Roman senator and integrating into aristocratic society. If true, this was not mercy alone. It was strategic absorption. Rome possessed a second form of domination beyond execution: assimilation. By converting enemies into Roman subjects, the empire neutralized their symbolic threat. Zenobia's survival allowed Rome to claim magnanimity. It also ensured she would never again function as a rallying figure in the East. Her physical body survived. Her sovereignty did not. To fully understand Zenobia's treatment, one must examine Roman attitudes toward female authority. Rome tolerated powerful women, but only indirectly. Influence was acceptable through male relatives. Direct sovereignty was Zenobia ruled openly. She adopted imperial titles. She commanded armies. For Roman observers, this compounded the offense. She was not simply a rebel. She inverted gender hierarchy. Thus, her display in the triumph carried layered messaging. The East has been subdued. Female political autonomy has been corrected. Roman masculinity has been restored. Similar patterns appear in earlier cases. Boudica's flogging and the assault of her daughters were not random cruelty. They were symbolic reassertions of dominance over a woman who dared to confront Roman authority militarily. Cleopatra's anticipated humiliation in a triumph threatened not only her life, but her mythic status as sovereign seductress and strategist. Rome understood that gendered humiliation carried amplified political force. Triumphs were expensive. Treasures paraded through Rome often funded public works afterward. Citizens expected tangible benefit from conquest. The spectacle served as justification for war. Zenobia's captured wealth was displayed to prove that the campaign was profitable. The queen herself symbolized the value of victory. In D sense, she was both political symbol and economic evidence. Cleopatra's suicide reveals the fragility of triumphal logic. Octavian required her alive. Without her, the emotional climax of his victory weakened. When she denied him that spectacle, he substituted a wax effigy. The Roman public saw through the substitution. Symbolism matters, but authenticity matters more. Zenobia's survival ensured Aurelian did not suffer a similar disappointment. In 260 AD, Emperor Valerian was captured by Shapur, the first of Persia. Roman accounts, particularly later Christian writers, describe his humiliation in dramatic terms, used as a mounting block, possibly flayed. After death, modern historians debate the exaggeration. Persian reliefs at Nakshi Rustam depict Valerian kneeling before Shapur. Regardless of detail, the symbolism is undeniable. Rome, architect of triumphal humiliation, experienced its own emperor in submission. The ideological structure fractured. If a Roman emperor could be displayed as captive, then divine invincibility was illusion. Zenobia died far from Palmyra. Aurelian was assassinated by his own officers only a few years later. The Roman Empire survived, but continued to transform, eventually dividing permanently into eastern and western halves. Palmyra itself was later destroyed after a second rebellion. Empire's project permanence History proves otherwise. Zenobia's story is not simply about defeat. It is about narrative control. Aurelian could not undo her military campaigns. He could not erase the months when she ruled Egypt. He could not erase the fact that Rome nearly fractured permanently. What he could control was the ending. By forcing her to walk through Rome in chains, he defined the final image the empire would remember. But history rarely preserves only the victor's frame. Today, Zenobia is often remembered not as the woman in chains, but as the queen who nearly reshaped the Roman world. The triumph achieved its immediate political objective. It did not determine her legacy. Power organizes spectacle. Time reorganizes memory. And in the end, empires become ruins, while stories remain.